So we thought we'd take the opportunity to actually give you a taste of the writing itself, of the books, because I think both of you have had individual sessions where perhaps people have heard you speak about the books. Did you do any readings there? You did some. So do you want to start again? And let's listen to some of the words of the page from both of them, and then we can talk about the books and the subject. Okay. I'm going to read what I read the other day, some passage from a chapter called The Doorknob. My book is called The Many Lives of Saida X. And the book is essentially about a person called Saida, who's a worker in Delhi. And in the last 30 years, she's done 50 jobs. So I'm reading from a chapter called Doorknob. एक और आ गई आकाश नाप. One more has arrived to measure the sky. One more woman has come to measure the immeasurable. When Saida moved to Karawanagar, Rupati said this about her. A few years later, Saida repeated this for Seema, who then said the same for Khushbu. No one remembers the source of this adage, but it continues to be said for every new migrant woman who joins the workforce in Karawanagar. Astronomers measure the sky in degrees, minutes, and seconds to confirm if a star has moved closer to the moon. The women workers of Karawanagar count the pieces, the dozens, the kilos of things they prepare to measure how close they are to survival. Things that are necessary for a common person's survival: food, snacks, spices, cosmetics, stationery, gowns, automobile parts, books, prints, spare parts, decoration pieces, toys, kitchen appliances. Everything is made and packaged here by women on a per-piece basis. I'm skipping some parts. Yeah. Over the next few months, Saida made wooden, metal, and plastic photo frames and was paid ₹70 for 144 pieces. She then made door hangings, bouquet of plastic flowers, and decorative pieces out of discarded bulbs, which were crocheted with wool for ₹60 for 144 pieces. And there are many other things that she made. Over the time, she put together a toolbox, which she fondly called her Jadoo Ka Pitara. Reshma, her daughter, later started referring to it as her CD, the only comprehensive testament to the variety of jobs she had done for years. Taking us. Yeah, now. Yeah, come on. Yeah, now. That is your lawyer. He says it. It'll be fun. Now he has that his son with the bacon. God is created. There's a complete new trendy. Oh, really? The goose. Shoulders. I notice this looking on folks that are enough to get it on. She get it in on and the dreams. And the people gave it. See, the angel.
The book? Hello. Yeah. The book I've written is called The Identity Project. It's the work of some 7 years and hundreds of interviews with people. The section I'm going to read you, and it'll be slightly longer, so please forgive me. It's actually about a man named Partha Banerjee. I met him in Calcutta in the year 2022. And I met him because I was at the library one day, a few months before that, and I found a book that he had written. It was called Inside the Belly of the Beast. It was an insider's account to being in the RSS. It was his account. And he wrote about what the organization was like inside and his perspectives of the organization now that he had left it. So when I saw the book, I first thought that this was a mistake. This should not exist. Something with this much detail, an insider account should just not be possible. It was such a surprise to come by because all the other books were by, say, Communist Party, little guides, and by writers like myself who were looking at it from the outside. But here was an insider account. So I called him up and he said, I'm coming to Calcutta from New York in the next few months. So let's go meet. Let's meet. So I went to Calcutta and I met him, and he took me up to his house, to a small apartment that he had in the city, and it was empty except that he had a lot of day beds in his living room. That I remember very, very clearly. And then he began to talk to me. I'll read a little bit about this, about his time with the RSS. But this is also about the moment where I met him and how he was responding to his own memories and his own memories of the RSS. Partha Banerjee told me he had left the RSS behind almost 40 years ago. And he said it as if he had firmly closed that door to this chapter of his life. But he was an RSS person. And RSS people like to say that an RSS man will always be an RSS man. And there is a reason for this. It seduces through community and family, and it exerts a gravitational force on individuals. This was why, even though he had left the RSS, he thought about it often, about what he could have been had he stayed. Instead, he was transformed from being an insider who was marked for future greatness to a complete outcast. His book was largely responsible for this outcome. It was a shy confessional, but its critique of the organization was so clear-eyed that even his father, whose devotion to the RSS tolerated no questioning, distanced himself from him. He was completely heartbroken, Partha said. We stopped talking to each other for a very long time. This is after his book came out. The space between them had lasted years, giving him clarity, and he now saw his father not just fondly, but also as a man with distasteful views. His father was an RSS man. The look on his face when he spoke about his father showed that he had accepted both impressions. There were no new discoveries to make, only insights from his recollections. As a parent, Jitendra Banerjee was an honest man who had raised his children without compromise on their values and their education. He made time for Partha's cricket and football matches and took him to watch the bridge on the River Kwai. He wanted his son to be shaped by good cinema and partake in the culture of the time. That part of him could not be removed from who he was. But he was also RSS through and through, and the things he did and said were also in his nature. When his son looked past the love, he saw his father's completely racist, Islamophobic, and fascist nature. Partha said his racism was expressed in a moderate way. These aspects of him were plain to see in what he read, what he said, in the values he brought home to his family. This is Partha telling me that I would hear from my father that communists and communism are evil, that Islam is evil, that Christianity is evil. I was reading RSS magazines and newspapers that were completely full of hatred. I did not know it was hatred because I thought it was true. I was made to believe that what I was reading and hearing was the ultimate reality. Partha was born in 1956. After he told me about his father, he said he wanted to show me who his father was within the RSS. He walked over slowly from the chair in his living room to a book cabinet by the wall, lowered himself on a daybed placed against it, and extended an arm to catch a shallow groove on one of the cabinet's sliding glass panes. He used his free arm for balance. Behind the panes were colorized pictures of his parents, some of which were covered in plastic to preserve their memory. In one family photo, Mr. and Mrs. Banerjee kept a respectful distance from each other, and their faces said nothing. Nothing in this picture spoke of Jitendra's unease with Muslims, nor of his wife's struggles with Jitendra's financial choices. In the cabinet were trophies, a poster, a picture of dancers, a picture of someone eating, and small conches carved from stone. While he browsed through these things, a painting of Edgever fell out of the pile. He had questioning eyes, a round face, a luxuriant white moustache, a satiny reflection on the tall black cap that marked him as RSS. Her giver had died young, at 51, and had since achieved the highest official status an RSS man could be assigned, an avatar. This entitled him to be remembered with a sense of divinity and admiration that reaches the level of God worshipping, Banerjee had written in his book. There were gifts to Jitendra, who was Partha's father, on his wedding day from an RSS leader, Eknath Ranade, who had organized protests against his ban after Gandhi's murder, but had himself escaped jail. The rest of it is essentially a chapter about, and this is in the middle of the book, this is about how Partha was at first indoctrinated, but how, thanks to his mother's influence and her skepticism, she was a congressee in an RSS family, how she really pushed back against the ideas of the RSS very quietly in her own way, and how eventually that resistance came out through Partha after his father had died. And he came to believe that the organization that his father belonged to used people and then discarded them after they had no further use for him. This is actually a study of how people's minds are made, how children are sort of taught the RSS way of life, and how they eventually find their way out. And it's a small part of a larger book about how India has become the way it has today.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you for the reading to Neha. We were supposed to talk about journalism and literature and the intersections there. And I listened to you both read, and I know both the books, having read them. And I think that perhaps the things you could not do in journalism are what I'm hearing when you read from your books. There is empathy here, there is description, there is an attempt to understand other people's points of view, and to not put anything in black and white, but always in shades of blue or gray or whatever else they lend themselves to. So what has it been like for you to move from investigative reporting and journalism to writing a book? Was this a need to do more out of it? Or was it just the fact that you had bigger stories to tell which required more space, more pages, more readers? I mean, where does that journey of movement begin for you, Neha? This is my favorite story, which is for some point in time, I was working for a television news channel for 2 years, and that's when I realized what I definitely don't want to do in life. A big corporate group had bought 37% share in the media house that I was working in. So this editorial team was called, and we were given a briefing. And in the briefing, we were told by the marketing team that from now on, our target audience is going to be the urban rich. So which means the prototype of that urban rich audience is going to be a 35-year-old male techie sitting in Bangalore. So when he comes back home in the evening, he should switch to the news channel, which means the content of the bulletin, the stories, the graphics, even that fire that you see on the screen, all of them are apparently according to the liking of the 35-year-old techie. And then the editor turned around and told us, I was in the investigation stage, we were told that you guys is Jolawana reading our story that you're doing. This won't work. You can't do a story on malnutrition for prime time because we have to obviously sell modular kitchens and kitchen appliances, and that's going to mess with the buying mood of the viewer. So you can't do all that. So I was particularly told that why don't you go now? I just come back in Moderator after this story of farmer suicide and many of those things, and they turned around and said, from now on, you should maybe start with an investigation of all the rich kids who race fast cars in South Delhi. So I obviously realized I have no skills to do it. And so I was not able to survive in that. And soon enough, I switched to freelance reporting. Last 13 years, I've been working independently. But thankfully, the other thing that happened was that there was an anti-rape movement in 2012. So before that, if you would pitch any stories on sexual violence, there was a lot of dismissiveness. after the anti-rape movement, Muslims could no longer dismiss that, except that they also wanted to do it in a very sensational way. So initially, when I was working as an independent journalist, the freedom to write about gender and sexual violence with a more sort of intersectional lens, that was helpful. But I realized even my reporting was very episodic and around events. And one thing, two or three reports that I had done that changed things in my mind was one I had written about the Muzaffarnagar riots. These were riots that happened in North India in 2013 in two districts of Muzaffarnagar and Shamli. And there were hundreds of cases of mass rapes. Out of that, only 7 women had actually gone to the court and filed cases. But I realized once they filed the cases, they went back and started working in the farms of the accused. So basically, these were farm workers we were talking about. Around the same time, I also met women who were working in stone quarries in Mirzapur, again, one place in North India. And I met one Adivasi woman who had faced sexual violence, but could not take and she was pregnant because of that, but she could not take a few days off to get an abortion. As a result, she had to carry the child. And so I realized whatever I was writing around sexual violence was also very episodic. So my book started, one, with the frustration that in revolt, we are not going to write about urban rich. I don't want to. And the second bit was also that I wanted to tell the full story and not just episodes. And so, which is why I started initially, again, I not heard about the book. I was going to a number of working class areas in Delhi because Delhi, unlike Kolkata and Bombay, which have massive industrial units, Delhi has, in the master plan, the big industries are rolled out, which is why it has a number of small and medium industrial units, and as a result, a big unorganized workforce. So for me, the book started from that point when I went to a part of Northeast Delhi where I met women who were basically piece rate workers. And in India, after agricultural work, the place where women are employed the most is the piece rate work. And I happened to meet Saida, who was a weaver in Banaras, and she was displaced after the Babri Masjid demolition because her room was burned down. And that's when she moved to Delhi. And in the next 30 years, she did 50 jobs, working 12 to 16 hours a day and never being able to make more than 1/5 of the daily wage. So that's how, for me, it started.
I think all my life, I've been a journalist for about 20 years now. And all my life, I've just tried to make more space for the kind of journalism I want to do, which is I like going in depth. I like spending a long time on stories. I like interviewing people over and over and over again. And this is before I write a single word on page, much less publish a story. And I think while anybody who follows the news and who sort of looks at television media versus print media and then goes online and looks at things, you always get the sense that you got part of the picture. And as somebody who sort of worked within a lot of organizations, I started my career at Cricinfo, moved to Tehelka, and then from there moved to a bunch of magazines. I think if you've ever had that feeling, it's probably right, because what you do end up reading is due to a series of decisions that have been made editorially. Maybe there's a scandal brewing under the surface, which some editor has decided not to carry in their newspaper or their website because there's a personal relationship, or because they don't have the resources to investigate something. And so, as you know, my experience in all of these publications was simply that there was something going on under the surface that trying to explain how India was changing. And I was just not able to do it. I was not able to do it because the focus on what is happening today, now, this very second year, it just completely overwhelms the editorial processes of any newspaper or magazine that you're a part of. And this is aside from the external pressures of let's talk to this demographic and let's tailor our news to this particular audience, all of that. So I moved from place to place. I moved to the caravan because it was the only place in India that would give a writer 16,000 words to explore a story, and more importantly, not just the words, they would give you the time, and they would give you the sort of editorial structure and care that you needed to make a story what it could become. So often, like for example, if somebody in another newsroom says, "Go do a profile of say Arnab Goswami," it'll be a very quick one. It'll be like a 2-pager. Somebody will go hang out with Arnab for like a day or 2 days, and then you write down whatever. But what does that really tell you? These editors will like take 6 months, go talk to 100 people, go figure out what exactly they're telling you, and see if you can find patterns in the way Arnab operates the news, how much money he makes, what his interactions with clients are like, whether politicians are involved in the news making process, all of this. So it gives you that kind of freedom is not just invaluable for you as a reporter, but also I think as a reader, at the end of the day, when you read something like that, there is a difference in quality, and there's certainly a difference in your understanding, not just of the news media and that person, but of the way your country operates as well through its news. So I kept doing all of this, but it was never really enough because, as you know, India is changing really quickly. 2014, we felt it very strongly. And as a journalist, I was just not able to make sense of what I was seeing around me. These transformations which were happening across companies, which was happening across politics, which was happening in our own families as well. And so at a certain point, I was one of 2 investigative reporters at Reuters. I quit my job because what I wanted to explore went beyond what a news organization could give you. And they could give me a lot, but it was just not enough because I needed time and I needed space. And more importantly, I needed that peace of mind where I could go out and interview people at my own leisure, go out and understand things the way I wanted to understand. And you can't do these things with a day job. So after a few years of scrambling around and trying to find my way, because it is a capital intensive process, I was able to then get kickstarted on the book. And I'm not sure I remember going back to any other method after this.
Have the mic. You said it was a freelance sort of life that you began in, but I cannot not ask you this. But how do you survive then? Because without news organizations, without I know publishers' advances and how far those go. So what makes you think? How do you manage? Oh. I think I'll answer with that, except that I have all the friends have been kind. People have been kind, and I often, you read about Harper Lee, and there's this incident where Harper Lee tells her friends that I want to write a book, and then everybody comes and collects money and hands it over. And I often dream of having those friends. I don't have them, But I have freelancing, yes. To me, I was telling somebody that my best work has happened when the money has gone, is about to get over the account, because then I know that I have to write these 5 pieces this month. Those 5 pieces will take care of the rent, and then later on I can do whatever. So not having money is a good thing because it makes you do things. That's why it has happened. And I've also taught at a couple of places, but that's in and out. So I don't really have an answer except that you also learn to live on less money. But you also have written stories that have led to legal issues. So what happens to the freelancer when an organization like the state, for instance, actually takes you on, or individuals with money take you on? How do you handle that? Do you have backup? Do you have pro bono friends? Oh, okay. So I'll answer this question in a more structural way because we need to look at what is happening with the media. There is the new revenue models of the mainstream media are basically shutting down those bureaus and outsourcing that work as gigs. And so this is not just specifically for me. So I'll tell you about the case that you talked about. And in 2016, I had done a story on how three RSS affiliated organizations are trafficking children from the Northeast for the purpose of indoctrination in the Hindutva ideology. I traced 31 girls between the age group of 3 to 11 who were basically from Bodo and Santhal tribes, and their parents were told, and I was talking about it yesterday, Rahul, that basically the parents were promised free education and lodging for their daughters, but once they were taken, the parents just couldn't contact their daughters at all for a year and a half. And so I managed to trace 20 of those girls in Surendranagar district in Gujarat and 11 in Patiala in Punjab. And when I met these girls, say 7 or 8-year-old girls, they told me that how in the last 1.5, 2 years, they were not given any formal system of education, but instead bhajan and sanskar classes and how to do self-immolation to save themselves from Muslim and Christian invaders. And these were 7 or 8-year-old girls who were telling me this. They were also talking about how they are not allowed to speak in their languages. So they were not allowed to speak in Bodo or Assamese, but they were only allowed to speak in Hindi and Gujarati. And I'm talking about this because you may have read about how the same residential school system in Australia or Canada took away a number of indigenous children and stripped them of their culture and their language and everything. And 2017, I think Trudeau also apologized for that, and this conversation goes on. And the same thing is happening in India. And the CBCID report tells us that in the last 10 years, 10 lakh children have been taken in such a manner. And this is the government report. So once I did the report, thankfully, because I had corroborated it, the parents had told me I had documents to talk about these girls, and I had also finally managed to trace them. The cases that were filed against me were 2 criminal defamation cases and 1 of inciting communal hatred, which RSS has accused me of doing, and picked up a paragraph and told me that this is inciting communal hatred. So this is the 8th year now. I live in Delhi. I have to travel to Guwahati every 3 or 4 months. I was telling Rahul and many other people, the good thing is that the case is in Guwahati, so we managed to see some part of Northeast each time you have to go to the court. But coming back to your question, it is not just me. Most journalists now, whether they are employed or not employed, they are not being backed by the people that they are publishing these stories for. So I published a story for Outlook, and Outlook hasn't supported me. So each time there's a hearing, it's always about scrounging money from here and there, doing this assignment or that assignment, so that we're enough. I have had help little bit from some organizations, but that's about it. And I also want to say that I'm privileged. I write in English and I live in Delhi, but that is a privilege that a lot of journalists do not have when they do this from a smaller town. So comes back to the question that are we now increasingly trying to make journalism and writing a profession only for people who have some sort of class, caste privilege? And that is a question that also needs to be thought about.
So before I come to you, Rahul, one question though. You said Outlook did not support you in this. But when journalists like you write these stories, don't you have contracts that make sure that you are protected?
No Indian news organization, and I would like to say even the most ethical and progressive news organizations do not sign contracts with journalists in India. And it hasn't happened till now.
And there's absolutely no attempt being made to correct this because it's obviously not serious.
There have been appeals made, but nothing is happened.
Okay, all right. Rahul, you tell us now. I mean, is this a situation that you see as dire? Is this only for the privileged? Do you feel privileged in this process, or do you feel victimized sometimes? And also for you, an additional question. You've been published internationally with this book. the US, the UK, and I don't know where else there might be a edition coming. Does that in some sense make you feel more secure when you write books that are controversial?
No, not at all. Because I think in India, as you know, the legal process, I think it just takes one person, and that's that. Really, I think the situation is definitely dire, and it has been for a little while. I think the protections that journalists should have, whether employed or unemployed, just do not exist over here. And I think somewhere that collective sort of that collective feeling that should exist, that we're all in it together, that for some reason does not exist as yet. And so, one of the things that I've been thinking about is how do you support people? How do you create new foundations? Do you create new structures that maybe provide financial assistance to journalists? Do you sort of create a base from where journalists can feel more secure and do the work that they really want to do, and give them those protections? Because you're looking to solve these problems by looking at, the mainstream media. And I would say that these guys are the source of the problem are the source of many of the problems that we see today. Many of the journalists I know, some of the best journalists in India, don't have jobs anymore. They are looking at alternative revenue streams. They're writing for papers abroad. They're doing reports. They're doing editing assignments. They're ghostwriting. I don't want to go on about the misery of the journalists when there is so much else happening in this country around us. But I think somewhere when I'm talking about journalists, what I'm really talking about is people who contest the official narrative that you are giving on a day-to-day basis. These are people who are going out at risk of life and limb, going out, finding out facts. They're bringing them to you. And there is really no support for what they're doing. And so when I say this, that they need more support, I mean it in the public interest. It is actually in the public interest to support journalists and just make sure that you have access to information so that you can make better choices. That's all it is.
Yeah. Oh, well, I do think that things have changed in the recent past, at least in terms of books, for instance. And while, say, 15 years ago, journalists writing books was not such a common thing, now increasingly there are more of you stepping into the publishing space or the mainstream book and writing it. And I think that may well have changed also this perception that books are also only about certain things like urban, the Vikram State variety of publishing, etc. So I think you guys just completely transformed the publishing space. And I don't think you did it deliberately, but every year there are some books published within the nonfiction space by reporters, journalists who become writers. And that has enriched, especially the English language space, so much. And I do think that is a little underrated as change goes. But do you feel conscious of this? And do you feel that you fit into a tradition that is to do with writers and books and, prose writing as opposed to investigative journalism? Or do you feel it's just one continuous, seamless sort of process?
I think a lot of credit for that goes to people like Karthika, because you publish these books, right? They're not these. We were just talking about how they're not very takers who publish the stuff that we are writing, and that's one of the reasons that there is space now for people like us to write this and to get it out in a long form format. The other thing for me, particularly, yes, it has been an extension, like Amitabh was saying earlier about this being a caravan conspiracy, and Rahul also spoke about it. For me, initially, I was talking about it earlier when I joined journalism. I was a Tayalka. For years, I went through this that I'm a good reporter, but I'm not a good writer. And this is the kind of polarization that happens in all newsrooms, particularly trade newsrooms, where there are good reporters and there are good writers. And to be able to jump that and to be able to just feel a little better about yourself. I think with me it happened when I wrote this profile of Akhilesh Yadav for Caravan, and then later on a profile of Mayawati for Caravan. And just the fact that you could go and speak to 100 people and find out about a person and write 12,000, 30,000, 16,000 words. And it was interesting because for Mayavati, in my earlier regimented way of reporting, I would never include these things. For example, every possible man that I met who had worked with Mayavati over the course of 30 years, they said at least 10 or 12 people told me that when I left the party, I slapped Mayavati and I left. And so that whole thing of a man saying, I slapped her and I left. So not able to acknowledge the leadership of a woman, of a Dalit woman in a feudal state. And so you have to say, this is what I did before I left. There was no possibility of including that in a report. Or the fact that all these myths that were created about her, that Mayavati does not like the chirping of the birds, so which is why she has no windows. Or she always wears these gowns at home that are like Queen Victoria, whatever, gowns, stuff like that. So the possibility of including that and then, of course, working on your craft or doing it better. Or for Akhilesh, for example, the fact that for 4 months you have to listen to all the Chhatra Netas in UP, and then soon enough they'll start sending you all the WhatsApp shairi ki diye chal rahe aur hawa chal rahi aur aapki yaad aa rahi hai, and then you have to put up for that for 4 months because you have to write this piece. So the possibility of including the fun of it was something that made me do the book later.
I must tell you that when your book came out, there was someone who's a very well-known writer who started reading the book, and then I met her the day after or something, and I said, what did you think of the book? And she said, I started reading after 10 pages. It's outrageous. How can someone write so well? I won't need to write again, so I'm not reading it anymore. So, I mean, obviously, you turn at some point into a very good writer. Now, I think we have to end soon, but I want you to have the last word on this. Tell us a little bit about the switch from journalism and writing to writing a book like this, and knowing that you were writing this with the contracts in hand, had to deliver to publishers around the world in a certain time. Like, what is that kind of writing all about?
I think there's a bit of unlearning that you do when you move from strictly journalism to book writing. I think the first thing you tell yourself is there are no rules over here. And you're not just breaking away with publishing conventions and writing conventions and reporting conventions. You're also breaking away with what is expected of you as a reporter. Things like balance and other such problems that you grapple with as a reporter. I didn't feel the need to be balanced. So I was writing my own, sort of figuring out my own language in the process of it. I was figuring out that, hey, there are laws that I can stretch, and there are laws that are just not laws, and I made them up in my mind as something that writers do over a period of time. So there was a lot of learning in that way. And I think over 7 years of sort of going, writing, rewriting, all of that stuff, a few truths become clear to you about, not just about writing itself, but about yourself, about what you believe in, what you've respected all your life, and why you've respected certain conventions. So I think for me, it's a very, very personal thing. I write not for anybody else. I write for myself. If I'm doing an investigation, I'm not doing it because there's some greater public good to it. I'm doing it because I am interested in it, because I want to explore it, and I'm doing it my own way. When I do my research, I'm doing it my own way because it makes sense to me, not to anybody else. So there's that. But of course, at the end of the day, after you've done with everything and you sent everything to your publisher, suddenly it hits you like, oh my God, people are actually going to read the stuff that you've written. So that is the scary part. That is the scariest part of the whole process. But other than that, it's just, I recommend it if you ever get the opportunity to do it. I think everybody should try their hand at it at least once. You really do discover something about yourself. So that's all I'm saying.
I don't think we have time for questions, so I'm going to have to wrap up. But thank you both, wonderful writers, investigative reporters, all. Thank you, audience.